It was a chilly autumn evening in the heart of the city. The streets buzzed with life, people rushing home, taxis zipping by, and the faint hum of distant conversations filling the air. Yet in one corner, just beyond the reach of the city's spotlight, sat a woman named Margaret, worn but radiant, pouring her heart into a song. Her voice floated softly above the noise, captivating those who paused long enough to listen. Margaret wasn't just singing, she was surviving. Each note she sang was a lifeline, a way to scrape together enough to feed her young son, Arthur, who sat by her side bundled against the cold. Life hadn't always been this way for Margaret. Once, not so long ago, she and her husband had lived modestly but happily. She could still remember the warmth of their small home, the laughter that filled their evenings, the dreams they had woven together. Her husband had worked tirelessly, and Margaret had been content knowing they were building a life. But then illness struck. Cancer came like an invited storm, draining them not only of their money, but also their hope. They sold what they could, paid medical bills, and held on. But the disease was relentless in the end. After all the fighting and all the sacrifices, Margaret's husband was gone, leaving her alone with Arthur and nothing but memories. The crushing weight of those memories and the relentless grip of poverty were things. Margaret rarely spoke of how she had lost her home, her stability, and her security, but she had not lost her voice. That voice, her gift, was all she had left, and so she sang every day with each song. She poured out her heart, singing not just to survive, but to remind herself that beauty still existed in a world that had taken so much from her. And while she sang, Arthur sat quietly looking up at her with big, trusting eyes, oblivious to the hardship, only knowing the comfort of his mother's presence. One evening, as Margaret's voice rose and fell, with the story of a life much like her own, a sleek black luxury car rolled down the street. The car was impossible to miss, with tinted windows and a polished shine that hinted at the wealth of its owner. Inside sat Hugo, a man of power and affluence, with a life far removed from the struggles of the street. He was a wealthy entrepreneur, known for his successful events and entertainment business, a world where luxury and indulgence were his daily currency. Hugo was used to being surrounded by the best money could buy. But something in Margaret's voice made him stop as Hugo rolled down his window. The voice drifted into his car, pure and unfiltered, stirring something deep within him. He listened, captivated, as Margaret's song enveloped him, pulling him into her world. If only for a moment. He watched her. A woman dressed in worn clothes was standing on the sidewalk with her son beside her. Her voice was steady, despite the obvious hardship in her eyes. She wasn't singing for fame or applause. She was singing for survival, and Hugo, a man accustomed to privilege, felt a tug at his heart. He hadn't felt in years. When she finished her song, Hugo stepped out of his car, moving toward her. Margaret, surprised and a bit wary, looked up, her eyes meeting his. His presence was commanding, his polished suit, a stark contrast to her worn clothes. Hugo introduced himself, extending a hand to her, a gesture that felt both foreign and comforting. "You have an incredible talent," he said softly, still somewhat in awe. "How do you manage out here like this?" She stayed hesitant at first, sharing her story, her husband's illness, the endless medical bills, the home they had lost, and the street that had become their new reality. She spoke quietly, each word heavy with the weight of her journey, and Hugo listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. After a pause, he looked at her with a determination in his eyes. "I can't change the past, but I'd like to help you move forward. How would you feel about joining my team?" he asked, his voice steady. "I run a company that organizes high-end events and concerts. I'd like you to perform at our events. We'd pay you, of course, and you'd have a place to stay." Margaret's eyes widened in disbelief. The world around her seemed to blur as she tried to process his words. She felt a mix of gratitude, shock, and hope. With a trembling voice, she thanked him, her heart swelling with the promise of a new beginning. Arthur looked up at her, sensing the change in her expression, and smiled, his face lighting up in pure, innocent joy. In the days that followed, Margaret and Arthur moved into a comfortable guest house owned by Hugo. It wasn't the lavish home Hugo lived in, but it was warm, safe, and more than she could have hoped for the first night. Margaret found herself lying awake, feeling a sense of security she hadn't known in months. She looked over at Arthur, peacefully asleep, and felt the tears well up. This wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a chance to rebuild. Soon after, Ryan introduced her to his team, who welcomed her with open arms. She practiced tirelessly, determined to make the most of this opportunity. When she performed at her first event, her heart raced with nerves, but the moment her voice filled the room, the crowd fell silent, captivated. Her music wasn't just entertainment, it was a story of resilience, a testament to the strength she had found in her darkest moments. People were moved, and Hugo, watching from the sidelines, couldn't help but feel a deep pride in the talent he had discovered. As the months turned into years, Margaret became a staple at Hugo's events. Her performances highly sought after her songs became synonymous with hope and resilience, touching the hearts of everyone who heard them. She gained recognition, her reputation growing, and with that came stability. Ryan, seeing her dedication and the impact she had on others, raised her salary. He also made a promise that touched Margaret deeply. He would ensure Arthur's education was fully funded. When Ryan shared this news, Margaret felt her heart swell with gratitude. She looked at him with tear-filled eyes, unable to find the words to express what his support had meant to her and Arthur. She thanked him with a voice that trembled with emotion, and in that moment, Hugo understood the profound impact he had made for Margaret. This wasn't just about money or stability. It was about reclaiming a life that had once been full of dreams. As Arthur grew, he thrived in his studies, inspired by his mother's journey and the kindness of the man who had given them a second chance. Hugo became more than an employer. He became family. He attended Arthur's school events, celebrated birthdays with them, and supported Margaret in every way he could. Years passed, and Margaret's life became a testament to the power of kindness and resilience. She had gone from singing on the streets to performing for audiences that hung on her every note. And each time she looked at Arthur, she was reminded of the journey they had traveled together from a life of hardship to one of hope and fulfillment. Hugo, too, had changed. The once distant and business-focused millionaire had discovered a deeper purpose in life, a purpose rooted in the impact he could make on the lives of others. Margaret's story had touched him in ways he hadn't anticipated, and the bond they had formed was something he cherished as they gathered for one more celebration. Margaret looked around the room, seeing familiar faces, laughter, and joy. She realized she had not only found stability, she had found a family, and as the music played softly in the background, she knew that her journey, though marked by hardship, had brought her to a place of true belonging. As the years unfolded, Hugo remained a constant presence in Margaret and Arthur's lives. Although he had the wealth and influence to marry, he chose to stay single, finding fulfillment in the family he had created with Margaret and her son. Hugo saw that Arthur had a unique approach and ideas that could take them in new directions. It wasn't long before Hugo made a decision that would change both of their lives. He proposed that they become business partners, venturing together into a new line of work, a concept Arthur had developed and which Hugo believed in. They established a new branch focused on high-end event technology, and to both their astonishment, it was a runaway success, working side by side. Hugo and Arthur transformed this idea into a thriving business, building a company that was both innovative and meaningful to them. Eventually, Arthur found love and prepared to start a family of his own when his wedding day arrived. He couldn't imagine it without Hugo by his side. Though Hugo wasn't his biological father, he was there as his mentor, his partner, and the man who had believed in him from the beginning. The wedding ceremony was a beautiful celebration filled with joy and laughter, and as Arthur said his vows, he occasionally glanced over at Hugo, who was standing in the front row watching with pride. Margaret, overcome with emotion, found herself fighting back tears as she looked at her son and the man who had helped make this moment possible. As the festivities drew to a close, she approached Hugo with a small, elegant gift. Opening the box, he found a watch. Timeless and classic, Margaret's voice was thick with emotion as she said, "This is a small token, a reminder of every moment you gave us, every second you sacrificed. You've been an angel to us, Hugo, and I can never thank you enough." Hugo, touched beyond words, took her hand and then pulled her into a warm embrace. "Margaret," he replied softly, "I don't think it was by chance that we met. I feel like I was sent to you by something greater. We crossed paths because I was meant to be there for you and Arthur." They stood together in silence for a moment, both of them deeply moved. As Hugo looked around at the gathering, he realized that his life had found a purpose. He had never anticipated that in helping Margaret and Arthur, He had found a family, a reason to build and grow a legacy, not of wealth alone, but of love and transformation. It was a lesson in the beauty of selfless giving, and in understanding that success isn't measured by what you have, but by what you share. The years that followed only deepened their bond. Arthur and Hugo continued to build their business, now a thriving company with a global reputation, while Margaret cherished the family that had come together from the most unexpected circumstances. Hugo's life, though marked by his own success, became a testament to compassion and purpose. And Margaret, the woman who once sang on the streets for survival, now had a life full of love, security, and the profound knowledge that kindness and resilience could change the world. In the end, Margaret's story became an inspiration for many, a story of resilience, the power of kindness, and the transformative impact of a single act of compassion.